Hi, this is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoyed this critical thought, a detailed discussion on game design, and be sure to subscribe and you can pitch future critical thought topics. Alright everybody, for today's critical thought, we're going to be talking about boss battles and how they relate to video games and game design. The idea of a boss battle has been pretty much a part of the game industry since pretty much like we could maybe say NES to arcade era. And depending upon what the genre or design, you can have a boss fight for just about anything. From action games, RPGs, even puzzle games, strategy games, etc. It's all dependent upon the kind of boss fight that you're going for. And when we talk about boss battles, there's usually three very broad categories. And yes, I know that there is something on my shoulder. Don't worry, we'll get to that in a few minutes. The first kind of boss battle is essentially a harder version of what's going on that level. Typically a harder fight or challenge. If you had a normal enemy be, let's say, have like 20 points of health, maybe the boss has 30 or 40. And this was typically the style of many platformers of the NES, SNES, and Genesis era. In these cases, in some games, they actually just took like a normal enemy and they like blew them up to like 2 to 3 times his normal size, and that was your boss battle. And usually these enemies have either a stronger attack or they take longer to beat, and this is typically the way for many games to pad out levels and bosses. Again, there were so many 2D platformers released during the NES era that I've lost count of the number of bosses that were just simply like a harder version or a harder situation that was normal to that level. Now the second kind, and what is a little bit harder and rarer to do, is the idea that the boss is a test. And what do we mean by a test? A test boss fight is when the boss itself is built around a unique consideration or built around to test the player's mastery of a certain mechanic or understanding of the game. For instance, for those of you who watch the Bastion plays, let's imagine if there was a boss in that game that could only be defeated if you properly knew how to time the counterattacks. This will be the idea of that kind of test. We're taking a mechanic that the player already knows or has made use of, and we're going to take it further. One of the best examples of this is from Batman Arkham City, and I definitely brought this up before. In Arkham City, the Mr. Freeze battle is essentially a stealth test. The player has to make use of every stealth tactic they have in order to damage Mr. Freeze. And if you play the game on the hard setting, which I think gets unlocked on New Game Plus, you literally have to use every specific stealth takedown tactic to beat Mr. Freeze. And this kind of boss design is very rare. Another example that I could think of would actually be from the puzzle genre, with games like Catherine for the PS3 and Xbox, and Space Chem. Space Chem, despite being a very challenging game in of itself, also had boss-style stages that required you to take your knowledge of the game's mechanic further to complete some kind of crazy situation. I think there was like one section where you have to use your knowledge of programming and the game's logic to battle an alien spaceship. Again, ask Zach that one. Ask Zach Barth that question. But the kind of boss fights that we typically see today and what's become the most popular are challenge fights. This is when you have the boss built around a very specific set of mechanics or situation, and it's up to the player to figure out how to get through it. And we have a lot of examples of this. And one of the big examples would be the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Each boss fight in a Metal Gear game is completely unique to the game, or unique to that situation, and requires the player to make use of their mechanics and their strategies with the unique factors of that boss. The difference is that you're not being tested in terms of mastery. It's more about, okay, if these are all my tactics over here, how can I use this to beat this boss? And the Metal Gear series gives you usually a very wide berth for it. Anyone who remembers the Anyone who remembers the end fight or fighting the boss at the end, I know that may not have come out right, knows that you had different ways to go about it. And it wasn't just you using one style, one strategy. It's about saying, if I can do this, how can I deal with the boss? And another big example of this would be the Soulsborne series. In any of the Dark Souls, Bloodborne, etc. titles, the player is always put in a position where they have to master the game. So it's not really testing the player in terms of a boss fight. It's about saying, okay, you know how to do this. Now this is what the boss can do. How do you get around it? And it's about you figuring out how to use your own strategy and tactics against the boss. And this is why, even though the player's style or the player's controls and tactics doesn't change throughout a Dark Souls game, how you fight the bosses does. So there's a difference between fighting, let's say, Pontiff Sullivan in Dark Souls 3 versus Champion Gundyr, or Ludwig versus Father Gascoigne, and so on. We can also talk about games that give the boss like special abilities or tactics unique to that fight. And we can finally talk about our friend over here. This is a character from one of the Shin Megami Tensei games. This is from, let's see if I can get this right, Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner Runo Kuzawa versus the Soulless Army. I think I got that all right. And the Shin Megami Tensei games are, let me see if I get them in the shot, there you go, are really good about these kinds of unique situations, despite the fact that the majority of them are turn-based RPGs. In Nocturne in particular, which was like the first, I think, big success over here, not counting Persona, each of the bosses had something special that was unique to them. And it was up to the player to figure out, if these are my available tactics, how can I deal with this boss? And some bosses could summon helpers, some could boost their abilities, some could have maybe a special instant kill skill if you fail certain conditions, stuff along those lines. And again, the player is asked to master the game, but it's not a specific test. It's more about taking your mastery and then adapting to the situations around you. And some really good examples of this would actually come from a very unique niche of games, and those are games that are just nothing but boss rushes. So you have stuff like, I think this guy's about to fall. There we go. Let's see if I can get him right. Wait. This will be my new way of holding things. There you go. Let's keep them there for at least a few seconds. Would be games built around just nothing but boss battles. So stuff like Titan Souls, Shadow of the Colossus, Fury from last year, and even something like the Punch-Out series, where there's nothing but boss battles, and each boss, again, has their own unique quirks and skills, and it's up to you to figure out how to best get around them. But we're going to wrap things up for today. I'm going to put him off my shoulder for a few minutes. Let me see if we can get him at least in the shot. There we go. But when it comes to boss design, it's important to understand just what kind of bosses you're going to make. A boss that is simply just a harder version of the regular enemies could actually become folded into being a normal enemy later in. And we've actually seen some minor examples of this with mini-bosses in a lot of action titles. When it comes to unique tests, you have to be very careful with how you design them. Or, I'm sorry, with just tests, not with unique situations. If the player hasn't been given enough understanding of a mechanic, then it's not really fair to ask them to master it for a specific fight. This is where situations that the game could throw in a brand new system or a brand new mechanic and then immediately throw in the boss fight. And there are cases where you have, like in the Dead Rising series or in Dead Rising 1, the final boss fight is basically a hand-to-hand battle, but the game never really gives you the chance to test those out because it conditions you to use weapons and your skills for it. Very similar to the Dead Rising 2 boss as well. When it comes to unique challenges, that is where you can really get creative, and honestly, we could probably spend 5-10 minutes just talking about Dark Souls in of itself, or any of the Souls games, in terms of how it designed very unique situations, all built around an unchanging pool of mechanics or abilities that the player has. But we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for watching. If you're brand new, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to pitch a future topic if you have one. And be sure to check back daily for more discussions on video games and game design here and on GameWisdom.com. So, until next time, have a great night. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.